And here we are with a listener mail. And who has written in but the hot dog himself, Lurian? And really, Lurian, it wasn't really even a write-in. It was more just you tweeted something and I decided to start something. And that's pretty much how this has gone. I love you, dude. But here's how it all began. Lurian put out a tweet and he said, "The fact that the only thing making people say PS5 hasn't had many games is the fact that PS4 versions exist for Horizon, Gran Turismo, and God of War is dumb as fuck to me." And I said, "I'd need to crunch the data to see, but in terms of initial thoughts, PS4 had more first-party releases at this point in the gen, but PS5 has tons of exclusives from second and third parties to bolster it, so it's definitely not lacking exclusive games." What happened from there is Lurian put up a slide of evidence for games, and this slide was flawed, which I pointed out to him immediately was flawed because MLB wasn't in there, which then he responded, and he shouldn't have responded to me with this. "Lurian, I love you, man. You shouldn't have come back with this. I took this bad." So I came back after he put up his slide that was wrong. "That list is flawed, bud. MLB has been around since PS3 or even before with annual releases. If you like, I'll spend some time and do it properly. Could even bang it into the next episode." And he came back to me, MLB is the game changer, is it? Not the 16 other games PS5 has. Take away MLB if you want. Heck, take away all second parties owned IP too. Lurian, shouldn't have come back with me with sass, bro. What happened then was Maloon jumped in, everyone was jumping in and giving thoughts about how I could do this list, how I could do it, how I could research it. Well, guys, I have done 3 hours worth of research. Now, you might think, 3 hours? That's not a great deal. To me, that's like, oh God, I don't know how much that is in company hours worth of money. But yes, I did it in work time. And yes, it's probably a lot of work time hours lost, right? In terms of financials, Hiroki Katoki would be on my ass for burning company funds for this. I've crunched the numbers, but before I get into my Excel spreadsheet, which I will link into the doc so you can see the proof there for yourself and see my workings out, guys, I want to know your initial thoughts. In terms of PS4 and PS5 at this point in the generation, so you were talking for PS4, it runs between the 15th of November 2013 until the 29th of February, until the end of the month of February 2017. For the PS5 library, from the 12th of November 2020 to the 29th of February 2024. So the same amount of time, really. 3 days in it. Which has the most exclusives, published games, etc. What are your initial thoughts? PS4 or PS5? Lewis, I'll come over to you first. I know you're an Xbox guy, so I'm not expecting you to have an intricate knowledge, but what is your gut telling you?
I mean, I have owned a PS4 and a PS5, so I don't. I mean, honestly, I feel like they'd be pretty close. I mean, so I have a couple of questions. So, does this include remasters of PS4 games that are now on PS5, like Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut and Death Stranding's Director's Cut and Last of Us Part 1 remastered and Last of Us 2 remastered and all the other fucking remasters? I mean, do they count as PS5 games or?
I'm not going to go into how I've done my list rules just yet. I'll get into that in a moment.
Okay.
But in terms of, at this point in the generation, if you're taking all games into account here, which do you feel in your gut? What is your heart telling you? PS4 or PS5?
I would say PS4, probably. Because, I mean, but then I'm that's me not counting remakes and remasters and, like, ports. Because there's a lot of ports, remasters, and remakes. Which is not, it makes money, so it makes sense to do it. But I think if you're just going off pure new IP, new games, I would say PS4. I would say had more. You said you're not going to answer my questions about the list itself. I was going to say, does it count retrospective stuff? Like Destiny is a first-party game now, but it wasn't when it was released. And
oh, no,
like
I wouldn't count that. I definitely...
No.
I wouldn't count that. No way.
No, I would say PS4 probably edges it, but I imagine it's quite close. I feel like they're kind of going on a similar pattern of what they did with the PS4 when it comes to the release cadence. But I would say maybe PS4 just about edges it, personally.
I love your thoughts. Mr. Philippoy, what is your gut telling you about this?
My gut is just having a little laugh to itself because I love the way you have narrated these tweets. And I think this probably goes on every single day, every single hour, every single minute, every single second of people browsing Twitter or X, whatever you want to refer to it as, in their own little way of saying it. If there's something that someone disagrees with, then it's going to come across a little harsher and you're going to be like, oh, I don't believe in that. And when you're saying it, you say it very eloquently, very nicely put, very softly. But you could read this tweet both ways, right? Am I siding with Lurian, the hot dog himself? Am I going to side with you? I don't side with you on many things when it comes to this show. Am I just going to play devil's advocate and just try and spark you off? But I think this one's a really difficult one with me because I wasn't really as involved in PlayStation with PlayStation 4 as I am now with PlayStation 5 and this podcast. I'm much more knowledgeable about the history of PS5 than I am with PS4, and I think pretty much any of the consoles really. So I've got to probably settle. If I'm going to say one or the other, I'm just going to go with PS5 because I'm on a PS5 podcast. I don't know the answer here, and I'd love to see how you've worked this out, Davey. I'd love to see the spreadsheet. I'd love you to go in depth because obviously showing a spreadsheet on a podcast, which is largely audio-based, it's best to dig into a spreadsheet with numbers, isn't it? Because that's what people really love to listen to. That's what people get off at home. They're listening to that, they've got their cocks out and they're stroking it. They're giving it the super soaker action, aren't they? When you bring out the Excel document. That's how you get the ladies into bed. Girls, I'm very good. I understand how to use Excel. I know a little bit of Visual Basic.
Oh.
You could just hear the girls at the moment, can't you? Ooh. Davey, let me know. I'm going to side with PS5 on this one.
Okay. Well, I got to say first off, Lurian, I'm only reading your tweets out like that in jest. I know there's no beef here, mate. I love you. I absolutely love you. But I did want to know this because I thought it was interesting because I see this banded around the PlayStation Nation all the time in terms of which had the better library. At this point in the generation, which has a better library, which has more Sony involvement, and there's so many different rules that you could apply to this. Do you include remakes? Do you include PS Vita? Do you include PSP games? Do you include PSVR? All these different things. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to look at this with one rule and one rule only, which is very, very basically which games are published by SIE, which means which games have Sony helped to fund. Now, there's certain games I've excluded from the list which are only funded in a territory. So, for example, if a game is funded by Sony only in Asia to bring it out there, but not the rest of the world, it did not make the cut. It had to be a worldwide Sony-published game to make the list. Okay? And that is it. I have excluded VR releases, Vita, and PSP. So it's console versus console. PS5 versus PS4. Now, I've crunched the numbers. This took me hours to do. I'm not going to read all the games out because we'll be here for fucking ages. But to put it simply, PS4 sweeps. PS4 has 39 games that were published by this point by SIE. PS5 has 22. Now, if we exclude remasters, remakes, ports, which I already thought about, it takes the list down even further. So if we exclude that, it takes out 6 games from the PS4 list, which takes it down to a total of 33 games, and the same total of 6 games from PlayStation 5's list, which reduces it down to a total of 16 games. So 33 compared to 16. So if you were looking at this as purely a numbers game, and this is where I find this quite interesting. If you looked at it purely numbers, you'd say, wow, SIE shit in the bed this generation. Fuck me, they're putting out nothing compared to what they did a generation before. However, I then went a little bit further beyond. I dug into the Metacritic on every single one of these games. Okay? It took fucking ages. Went into every single one, looked at the Metacritics, and got an average. So out of the PS4 generation, it ends with a Metacritic average of 74.9. PS5 generation is at an 84.8. Now this settles it with me and Lurian in terms of which generation put out the most. PS4. I was right, Lurian. However, this opens a bigger question, which I think you guys want to be involved in. Which would you prefer? 33 games, which are of very random quality. So, for example, you've got smaller games here which did really, really well, like Helldivers at 81, compared to something that was kind of similar size, but just didn't quite hit the mark when you're looking at your hardware rivals at a 56. So you're running that gambit for those smaller games. There's a lot more smaller games in this list of 39 games. If we include everything that's included. PS5, generally bigger experiences. The smallest game we got on this collection of games is Helldivers 2 or Astro's Playroom. Both coming in at an 82, 83 respectively right now on Metacritic. And maybe Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which is 79. That's scoring, right? Which would you prefer out of these two models, guys? Would you prefer quantity or quality? Lewis, over to you.
I feel like I've been put on the spot a little bit there. Okay. I mean, that's hard. Quality versus quantity. Because I don't think that, even though you said there's 33 games and they're a lower Metacritic score altogether, I don't think there's many bad games in that collection of 33 games. It's a tricky one. I personally think I preferred my PS4 to my PS5. So I would probably still go with the PS4, but it is interesting what you've said about the Metacritic. But you know, reviewers are always wrong. They gave Starfield a 7 out of 10, which is bollocks. So I don't trust reviewers anymore anyway. So fuck it. I'm gonna stick with PS4. How about you, Phil?
Cheers, Lewis. Very, very professionally handed off there because he has put you on the spot. And Lewis, he does this all the time. Let me tell you, the amount of times he's put me on the spot in an awkward situation and just made me talk about something off the top of my head, being ill-prepared. He spent 3 hours of his time in work putting this spreadsheet together. He's very well prepped here, okay? But you've got to have your head on a swivel with this lad, so get used to it, because I'm sure you'll be on a future show and he'll do it. He'll do it again to you in a heartbeat. So, yeah, look out. Look out. To address the question at hand here, PS4 quantity, PS5 quality, okay? And the question I'm asking, the counter question really, is what age am I at? Because if I'm younger Phil, you know, past Phil, I would probably go quantity, purely because I probably wouldn't have noticed the quality as much as I do now, because we do a PlayStation podcast. We talk about these games quite intricately. We pick them apart every couple of weeks, and we very much dig into the weeds with all these games. Now, back in the day, I just enjoyed games for enjoying games. So some of my favourite games of all times probably didn't have the highest Metacritic score. So I just appreciated the wealth of games that was out there on the previous consoles, you know, PS2, PS3. Wow, massive libraries. And I really appreciated those when I was playing them at that age. But now, as I said, being a 39-year-old, greying hair, still got it, never lost it. Fine wine, as they said, keep getting better. I prefer quality. 100%. So I believe I'm in the right place on a PS5 podcast because we are talking about quality week after week. And as we've said in this whole show, it's a very bright future for PlayStation 5. So I'm picking PS5. I'm sticking with the quality that we're getting through with that Metacritic average score of 84.8. Oh, that's high. That's very high.
Very high indeed. Phil, I'm going to come on your side with this. When I look at the two, and I am very much in the same mindset that I was on PS4. So PS4 I was very heavily involved with PlayStation, lived, breathed, sweated it. Didn't have a kid, so I had a little bit more time than I do now. And a lot of the experiences over this, when I was looking back through all these, I was like, oh my God, yeah, I remember playing all these. Like a lot of the smaller ones, they were very smaller, kind of like independent studios that like... they were just going out and just courting indies. If you remember, the PS4 was all about courting indies right at the start and getting a lot of them on board and getting them onto the system and really hyping them up. And that's why you've got so many of them published by SIE, because that was what the plan was back then, to get them on board. Did they all hit? No, they certainly didn't. You had gems like Housemarque put out in this list. Have I got Alienation on this list? Probably not. It probably came out just after. No, I don't. But I do have Resogun, right? So Resogun came from them, and I excluded a couple of ports they did for like Dead Nation and stuff like that, and Super Stardust. They weren't included. But all these like little games which just fucking were so good, because PS4 had like a real drought. If you remember at the start of the generation, a really huge drought between major releases, and the major AAA releases just weren't that good. They really weren't. You had like Second Son for Infamous, and then you were waiting donks. Drive Club got delayed for fucking ages. Supposed to be a launch title after like Killzone and Knack fucking terrible. The worst game, I think the worst rated game on this entire list, actually, yes. Out of the entire first 4 years, Knack, a first party published game, coming in at 54 on Metacritic, fucking terrible. PS4 lived on its indies. If it didn't have them, and if it didn't have Xbox fucking the bed so badly at the start of that generation, which they're still suffering for to this day, it would never have found the success that it did. And indies were the only thing that kind of carried it through. So that's why there's such a huge distinction between PS4 and PS5 list. Personally, out of the two, I would always go quality rather than quantity. We do not have the time. I'm always complaining about this, that there's too many games out, there's too many things that are vying for your attention. PS5 at the moment has been on an amazing cadence of exclusive and great experiences to the console. Now, this is, of course, PlayStation SIE published games. So it doesn't take into account of, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, any of these games, because they're not published. Sure, they bought the right to them, but they're not published by SIE. So if we were to include those into PS5 list, it probably would grow a bit, but so would the PS4 list on the same level. So PS4's always going to have more, PS5's always going to have less, but PS5's quality speaks for itself, and I will always take that rather than quantity.
So I've had a little bit more time to think about it after after I listened to your points. I was literally going to say what you just said about Davey, is that I don't ever feel like I have enough time to play everything, and my backlog is already ridiculously large. So maybe I should go for quality over quantity. However, I would like to make the argument that PS4 had more variety when it came to their games. Yes, it makes their Metascore maybe a bit lower, but I do feel the PS5, maybe they're playing it a bit too safe. There's a bit too much third-person action adventure cinematic movie type games, which I'm kind of bored of, to be perfectly honest. I like to have a bit of variety. I mean, I know you guys are not Xbox fans, but the part of the reasons why I like Xbox is that all their exclusives are very distinctly different to each other, and I like a bit of variety when it comes to my gaming. And I once I've played an action event, I only really play one third-person action game a year, really, if that, and then I try and play different stuff. So that's my argument for the PS4 over the PS5, personally, is that I feel like it has a better variety, and I would love to see PS5 bring more variety in, because like Helldivers 2 is the first game on PS5 where I feel like it's kind of harkens back to PlayStation of old, that had a bit more of a like uniqueness to it, which I really enjoy personally. So that would be my argument for PS4.
I completely understand where you're coming from. And when you're looking at things like Doki Doki Universe, Resogun, fucking Little Big Planet 3, Entwined Hohokam, all these games from PS4, they're all very different from each other. Although, I would argue that these PS5 games here, right, this is a short list, so I might as well just reel them off really fast. Demon's Souls, Sackboy, A Big Adventure, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Astro Playroom, Spider-Man Remastered, Destruction All-Stars, MLB, Returnal, Ratchet and Clank, Ghost Director's Cut, Death Stranding Director's Cut, Neo Collection, God of War Ragnarok, Gran Turismo 7, Horizon Forbidden West, MLB, Last of Us Part 1, Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection, Spider-Man 2, MLB, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, and Helldivers 2, they're all fucking very different games. The camera may be set in the same direction for some of them, but you cannot for a second think that Ragnarok plays anything like Horizon, that plays anything like Spider-Man, that plays anything like fucking Demon Souls. They're all so different. And that's, I don't mean to do this to you, Lewis, but I hate that argument because it's so ignorant. Because they are just so, like, you can say, like, sure, Knack and Resogun, they're miles apart, right? One is a ship combat game where you go around a circle, destroying people and picking up civilians. The one is a really shit platformer. They are worlds apart, right? All these games that I just listed there have in common is that the camera is third person. They do not feel anywhere near the same. And I think, like, with the Xbox argument, I don't know. I mean, like, you got a RPG coming out this year, which is third person. You got a shooter in Starfield, which looks, you can put it in third person. Like, do you use the same argument for that? I don't think so, right? Like, I would never say, like, oh, Starfield and Avowed are the same thing, right? Even though they're both RPGs, they can both, like, they're both RPG. Let's just leave it at that. They're both RPGs. They're the same thing. No. Like, that argument's so redundant to me. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
I personally disagree. I think there's a lot of similarities with those games. I feel like when you have to put the controller down for 10 minutes while they just have a cutscene where it's all cinematic and and then you have to go back to another third person action set piece over and over and over again. It does feel very similar to me. Honestly, I know you don't think it does, but I guess it's because I play lots of different variety of games and I get bored of the same similar looking things and similar playing games personally. That's just me.
It's each to their own. It's each to their own, right? And that's the big thing about it, is that there's so many different ways that you can go in this wondrous world of gaming, and there's no right or wrong. It's personal preference, and that's all it is at the end of the day.
Let me just jump in before we, have an argument here live on the show. It's, the charity boxing scene is huge, isn't it? KSI is making a lot of money with getting YouTubers to fight. So guys, listeners, viewers, if you would love to see Potato Chief take on Davey in the ring, ding, 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 well, it could happen. Let's get the votes in. Let's get the subscribers up and get KSI on the line. And we'll see if we can make it happen. But Lurin, I think you got off very lightly with that listener question, because Davey's got a new enemy, and his name is the Chief.
I love you, Chief. You know I do.
I love you too.
Oh, love you, baby. I'll give you that super soaker action later on.
Yeah,
after the
do
show.
that later, yeah.
I will. Let's move on.